Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from deep inside the heart of the future Liberty State. Sponsored once again by On Fire Ministries, in the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news, where it's not about right or left, it's about right and wrong. It's about our hope not being in man, but in Jesus Christ. About not ending in prayer, but moving to action. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Father, deliver us from the evil one.
Welcome to Patriot Radio.
Hello, fellow patriots. Today on Patriot Radio, has New York gone full commie? Or is it full jihadi? Or wait a minute, is it both? We're about to find out. Also, what's really going on in Iran, and our sleeper cells an actual threat here in the U.S. homeland with our guest, Clare Lopez. Here at Patriot Radio, we bring you the news and the information you need before everybody else so that you can be prepared for the times that are ahead and the times that are already upon us. And if you need to follow that, and all your friends and family should be following that, go to patriotradio.us/telegram. Also, if you need prayer, patriotradio.us/prayer. We want to pray with you through these trying times. After all, we're together in this. We're not alone. We also want to mention today that as we get into the Bible teaching, a lot of this has already been talked about, what's happening in the world today, and that should give you great comfort that we're not walking into some unknown, truly. So let's go to, for your wisdom from the Word, Isaiah 54, verse 9. For this is like the days of Noah to me, when I swore that the waters of Noah would not flood the earth again. So I have sworn that I will not be angry with you nor rebuke you. He's speaking to Israel. For the mountains may be removed and the hills may shake. Those are symbolic of kingdoms shaking or being removed. But my favor will not be removed from you, nor will my covenant of peace be shaken, says the Lord, who has compassion on you. Afflicted one, storm-tossed and not comforted, behold, I will set your stones in antimony, and I will lay your foundations with sapphires. Moreover, I will make your battlements of rubies and your gates of crystal and your entire wall of precious stones. All your sons will be taught by the Lord, and the well-being of your sons will be great. In righteousness you will be established. You will be far from oppression, for you will not fear, and from terror, for it will not come near you. If anyone fiercely attacks you, it will not be from me. This gives us a discernment point regarding Israel. Whoever attacks you will fail because of you. And isn't that what we just saw? But it's not just about Israel. It's also about the United States. Iran has for decades literally shouted death to America and death to Israel, but also called America the greater Satan. Obviously, we rebuke that in Jesus' name, and we don't receive that. But my point is that with this scripture, we can rest assured that God defends those with whom he has already made a covenant. And a lot of people get bent out of shape when I bring up a covenant with the United States. The fact of the matter is, in 1607, on a hilltop on the East Coast, a pastor erected an old wooden cross and dedicated this land to God. Some people may not like it, but that's what happened. And our God is faithful and true, even if we're not. So for all of us, it should be an encouragement, an exhortation. Press into the Lord in this time, and not just pray, but to stand and to expose evil wherever we find it. And when we stand against evil, it must flee. And that brings us now to your daily intelligence briefing, coming to us from the globalist front.
The future is built by us. We have the means to make progress on the global agenda.
Well, it looks like the Bank of International Settlements is squaring off potentially against the Trump administration. Trump issued an executive order on January 25th that order prohibits federal agencies from establishing, issuing, or promoting a central bank digital currency in the U.S. or abroad and requires the termination of related initiatives. The Bank of International Settlements, well, is coming against President Trump, saying that stable coins resemble digital bearer instruments that resemble financial assets more than money. In other words, we don't like what you're doing with freedom, President Trump. We have our own agenda. And if you don't know the history of the Bank of International Settlements, we're going to have a guest on soon that's going to talk about it. The history of it, well, is one of a one world economy. It's in Basel, Switzerland, and it is essentially the global reserve of Federal Reserves, if you will. No, thank you. Also, the computer science bubble is bursting. Young labor market is catching on that perhaps entry-level programmers may be removed, well, because of AI. Yes, that's absolutely true. And as we talked about last episode, there are certain industries like trades very likely will survive AI. Construction workers, electricians, plumbers, etc. We can't talk about AI, though, without talking about robotics. Remember, 50,000 robots that are supposed to be fielded by next year and 150 million by 2030. It's going to change our way of life drastically. And we need to have those conversations now. That brings us to an interesting story about the CDC. The CDC advisors vote to recommend removal of mercury from influenza vaccines. Wait a minute. I thought that wasn't in there. Perhaps there are things being exposed now that the people that called us conspiracy theorists are now going to have egg all over their face. And not the eggs they use to incubate vaccines, no pun intended. That brings us now to the China front. Gordon Chang bringing up a very important point. China's regime was directly responsible for tens of millions of deaths of its own citizens, a minimum of 30 million in the Great Leap Forward. So let's keep that in mind when people say, well, China's not going to do that to its own people. It already has. So what would they think about the U.S.? Far less than they think even about their own people. Also, Trump's strike on Iran just sent a message to Beijing and around the world. And one key thing I want to highlight here is that Rod Martin, a very good analysis that the U.S. has defended China, or excuse me, well, let's just call Taiwan free China, since the 1940s, in 1949 to be very specific. And what Trump did with the strikes in Iran is he's unpredictable. I mean, he said 61 days was why he allowed that to happen in talks with Israel, those strikes to begin. So as he acts decisively, that is unpredictable to dictators like Xi Jinping. And Xi Jinping has his own problems economically and internally with the power struggles going on there in China. So right now, this is one of the best deterrence measures Trump can possibly do against China, in addition to depriving them of the fuel to wage war and the economic ability to wage war. So some of these things seem totally contradictory, but I think there's a grander strategy involved here. And the China pivot is clearly what the United States is doing. Speaking of that, the Trump administration and local governments are, thank God, continuing to root out Chinese agents. Former New York governor aide in Chinese agent case faces new charges of COVID supply scheme. Linda Soon is accused of steering lucrative state contracts and businesses linked to her family in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. There should be more investigations of others to follow. Also, I remember back in 2015, on Patriot Radio, we talked about mosquito-sized drones. And despite the fact that it was generally accepted they were being developed and drones that were almost like spiders being used to crawl into rubble to rescue people during earthquakes, other natural disasters, some local officials here called me a conspiracy theorist. And now finally it is admitted that Chinese military lab has in fact developed a mosquito-sized drone. So if they're putting it out now, it means they've had it for a while. I wonder if there will be apologies forthcoming. Probably not, but it should give you the confidence to know that Patriot Radio is that far ahead of the curve. Also, Trump says officially they have signed a trade deal with China. Again, tariffs there, still over the 10% threshold. And that 10% threshold, at least economically, is hurting China or depriving them of the economic ability to wage war. We're going to see how this plays out here in the next 6 months and see if China has had to push its timeline back because it looked like they were going to be doing it this fall. Wall Street Journal says that China is delaying rare earth applications. These delays are coming in the form of heavily scrutinized applications, which are sometimes denied without explanation. Western companies say they are receiving barely enough magnets for their factories and have little visibility of future supplies. Hopefully that trade deal will remedy it. Also, China is reconsidering new natural gas pipelines with Russia. Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, after recent events in the Middle East, may actually end up happening. You'll see in southern Russia, the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline would go directly to Beijing. So this gives you an idea of where China is getting its oil from. And again, with our guest today, we're going to be discussing about 20 to 25% of China's imports of oil come from Iran. So with those, Russia and Iran, clearly China has to understand the strategic implications of what's happening in the Persian Gulf. And that's why they are seeking alternate routes for oil into their country. South Korea's new president assures the G7 while worrying Koreans, and others that have been watching this. Seems like he is fomenting a dictatorship there in South Korea, particularly cracking down on free speech. Could it be just him trying to establish dominance at the outset of his regime? I don't know. But many South Koreans, many Christians that are observing this, clearly see that he is taking actions that are very pro-China. We're going to keep our eyes on that here into the near future. Also, Thai and Cambodian troops have been deploying along the disputed border over the last month's deadly clash. Thailand has closed crossings and halted movement. Cambodia has suspended fuel exports, and it looks like the tensions are actually rising. This has been flying under the radar of a lot of people, but we're going to keep our eyes on that to see how China weighs in. That brings us now to the Middle East front. Following a temporary ceasefire with Israel, Iran's authoritarian regime is now redirecting its focus inward. And the Basij, the repression arm of the Ayatollah Khomeini's regime, is beginning to execute people and throw tens of thousands in prison. The pressure that was on the regime has been let off because of the ceasefire. And we're going to explore maybe a potential reason for the ceasefire. The fact of the matter is the Iranian people are going to have to raise up, and it's not going to come from outside. It's going to have to come from inside. Also, just minutes ago, Israeli and local media say 2 members of the IRGC and a nuclear scientist were killed in an assassination in Tehran. Some reports are that drones were used inside Iran, so that wouldn't be a violation of the ceasefire. So it's unclear as to whether that might be Israeli agents or the beginnings of the people in Iran rising up. Khomeini says that Trump saying Iran must surrender, that is no longer about enrichment or nuclear issues. He called the statement too grand for Trump's mouth and said the word surrender is laughable for a country like Iran. Obviously, in that part of the world, they have to save face. But he's also a 12er Jafari school. And that means that if they get a nuclear weapon, they will use it. So we have to take him at his own eschatology, study of last times, and his own words, his own beliefs. Again, we're going to explore why he is still in power here shortly. Netanyahu calls Trump and Netanyahu allegedly have a plan to bring peace, or at least stability anyway, to the Middle East here in 2 weeks, ending the Gaza war in 2 weeks, with Egypt and the United Arab Emirates and others taking over Gaza governments, Hamas leaders being exiled, all hostages being released, voluntary Gaza emigration, with several countries accepting the Gazans to emigrate, an expansion of the Abraham Accords with a normalization with Syria, Saudi Arabia, and others. And 2 of those countries have already acknowledged that the talks are ongoing, Saudi Arabia and Syria. And the United States recognizing partial Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, and Israel talking about a 2-state solution. Wild how fast things are changing there in the Middle East. To corroborate this, an Egyptian source said that Hamas has informed Cairo and Washington of its preliminary approval to return to the Witkoff plan. The group has agreed to a 60-day truce, and again, on the heels of these other developments, looks like they may be heading to a Middle East peace. In addition to that, the U.S. and Iran are to resume nuclear talks next week, according to President Trump. And this brings up a question. Was there a secret nuclear site called Pickaxe Mountain in Iran that has not been destroyed, but that was created to continue the nuclear program clandestinely? A great question, and one that we should be asking as negotiations go forward with a permanent ceasefire. Also, Washington will recognize part of Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank as part of this deal. That came out today, citing 2 sources. When we come back from the break, some developments on the Russian border, some sabotage in Germany, and here in the United States, has New York gone full jihadi or full communist? Or both? What if I told you you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today. And we're back from the break with the Russia front. 3 days ago, someone set several military vehicles on fire at a repair facility in Erfurt, Germany. Today, Russian social media channels were the first to publish a video giving rise to rumors that this was a Russian sabotage operation. By the way, just in context, this is right after the NATO summit. Ukrainian paratroopers just captured 15 Russian soldiers from the 810th and 155th Separate Marine Brigade in the Sumy region. So the lines there continue to shift back and forth. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like there's going to be peace there anytime soon. Part of the reason is that Putin has protected himself in this war by separating the direct effects of the war from the majority of the Russian population. Carolina Hurd, Russian deputy team lead at the Institute for the Study of War, told the Kiev Independent. Yeah, and that's partly also true for the United States. Not that we're supposed to be there. But I think what's important is to get primary source from the ground. Instead of listening to what bloggers are saying, get the actual videos, get the actual statements from soldiers, statements from those on the ground on both sides to get a more accurate picture of what's happening there. But the tensions, at least in the aftermath of the NATO summit, continue to rise as Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and now Poland have all decided to withdraw from the Ottawa Treaty that bans the use of anti-personnel mines, which means that whole border you see there will be mined and is already very likely being mined in short order. The only NATO state bordering Russia currently not planning to mine is Norway. Probably look for them to do it here soon as well. Also very interesting that finally it was admitted, and we talked about this on Patriot Radio in 2014. The guy who was literally in command of what was known then as the Little Green Men, the guys that were running across the border, obviously soldiers, obviously agents of Vladimir Putin, once again is saying that Crimea did not want to leave Ukraine and we forced them at gunpoint. Their words of the commander on the ground. So we're going to take that with some pretty heavy credibility there. Again, this notion that Crimea wanted to leave, at least clearly refuted here in this interview. Go look at it and listen to it for yourself. Also, Mike Shelby bringing up an essay by King's College London professor of war David Betts, a civil war breaking out in a Western country is a near certainty. Britain, France, and the U.S. are at the greatest risk, but at least 8 other European countries are right behind them. What is the source of that civil war? Well, he goes through some analysis of violent domestic conflict, but what's the source of the violence? Not really talked about exactly. Let me spell it out for you. At a certain point, Islam will seek to take over a country. And so where there are huge influxes of immigrants, many illegal, from the Islamic world, it is called hijra, or civilization jihad. This is a strategy that is very well publicized, very well acknowledged, at least for those who are paying attention. And the fact that a professor now has come out with the idea that, at least in France and Great Britain and the United States, there is a higher risk of civil war. Well, that's, I think, eye-opening. It should be for all of us. Polish protesters have blocked Poland's German border crossing to protest Germany deporting illegal immigrants, many of them, again, Islamic, to Poland. Of course, they're protesting that. And the Polish government's going to have to figure out how to get them out of Poland as well. Also, a U.S. State Department advisor appointed under Trump proposed using taxpayer funds to support French far-right leader Marine Le Pen as she appeals her embezzlement conviction, officials tell Politico. This has the effect, at least, of potentially souring relations with France. Not that a lot of people care about that, but we probably should at least not make enemies where we don't need to. That brings us now to the South America front. Last night, Ecuador captured Jose Adolfo Macias Villamar, a.k.a. Fito, the leader of the Los Chaneros criminal organization. So a win for the good guys. Also, Argentina's annual GDP growth now stands at 5.8%. Amazing. Highest in the Western world, and even higher than China. Javier Milei's miracle continues. That brings us to the national front. Trump says Democrats leaked intel on Iran strikes. If they did, will they be prosecuted? One of the more intense exchanges with Jerome Powell regarding the Federal Reserve, quote, "You are causing the country's $400 billion. You're the only person who has the power to do that. You care more about Harvard gender studies majors over plumbers in Ohio who can't afford a car loan because of these rates," end quote. And bringing up a good reason of why Trump is now looking at picks and vetting picks to replace Jerome Powell. No single man should have that power, and it is time to abolish the Federal Reserve. Might as well if we're going against the Bank of International Settlements. That entire system is corrupt, and the problem is there really is no oversight. Even though Congress renews the charter for the Federal Reserve, how can Jerome Powell be removed by the people? Shouldn't there be a mechanism in place to do that? The United States will create 2 new military zones along the southern border with Mexico. Pentagon officials said Wednesday the first national defense area will be installed along a 250-mile stretch of the Rio Grande in Texas and administrated as part of Joint Base San Antonio. The second will be next to the Marine Corps Air Station in Yuma, Arizona. So the border continues to be secured. Which brings us to what happened in New York. Interestingly, Democrat strategist James Carville warned Democrats against cheering over New York City's mayoral primary results in an op-ed for the Washington Post on Wednesday, saying that they may lose votes nationally by nominating the far left Zohran Mamdani. Well, he's not just far left. He has ties to jihadis, or at least those who would espouse the beliefs of jihad. In addition to that, he has ties directly to the Democrat Socialists of America, which brings up the Miami mayor, who demands a total ban on communists like Zohran Mamdani from becoming U.S. citizens or holding public offices. Shouldn't be allowed to be citizens, certainly shouldn't be allowed to run for office. Communism is a virus trained to penetrate our country, end quote. Here's the other issue. On the application to become a U.S. citizen, you actually have to answer questions about your affiliations with terrorist organizations and your affiliations with organizations that seek the overthrow of the United States, aka communists. So that brings up a point that came up from Representative Andy Ogles, who said he needs to be deported, which is why I'm calling for him to be subject to denaturalization proceedings. Because if he lied on those forms, he lied and gave the false intent to become a citizen, and that is grounds for denaturalization, of the stripping of your citizenship. Also, in the wake of that primary, New York City Mayor Eric Adams is running for re-election as an independent candidate, setting up a competitive general election contest with Zohran Mamdani. So there may be hope yet for New York. Also, the violence from the far left Marxists continues. Transgender TikToker goes viral for urging followers to get a gun and kill ICE agents, quote unquote. And I know that the FBI is already all over this, and we look forward to pending arrests and prosecution. The Telegraph reveals that Palestine Action is planning a coordinated wave of attacks on Royal Air Force bases across the UK, uncovered after his journalists infiltrated the group and joined an online meeting. Well, don't think that that's going to stop in the United Kingdom. Might also involve U.S. bases there. But mark my words, bookmark this episode, these comments right here. We're going to clip them as well. That could come to the United States of America very soon, because what happens there as a test bed will come here. Also, California Muslim tried to supply weapons for ISIS and spoke of murdering a Jewish man. This, quote, this kafir, Robert Spencer bringing us that story. And Laura Loomer bringing to us a case. And actually, Breaking 911 had the original article of an Egyptian man who violently kicked a CBP agriculture detector dog named Freddie. Well, you boot the dog. Here's the good news part. You get the boot out of the country. So, will there be sleeper cells here in the United States? Our guest, Clare Lopez, is going to be talking about that here shortly after the break. But the fact of the matter is, the question should be, is our counterintelligence apparatus capable of actually rooting them out? And is that why President Trump did the ceasefire, to give the FBI time to round them up? 670 Iranians arrested so far in recent weeks, and that is likely to continue. So is the threat real? Yes, of course it is. Question is, how many? And nobody really knows, which is why we have the Second Amendment to be trained up and ready. Maybe it's you that stops an attack like happened at that church in Wayne, Michigan. Again, the Second Amendment wasn't just for hunting. Homan reveals ICE rescuing migrant children trafficked to pedos under Biden, lives apart from wife due to death threats, according to an article from Zero Hedge. President Donald Trump's border czar revealed that ICE has rescued migrant children that have been trafficked. 300,000 missing children under the last administration. And we rescued victims of sex trafficking 2 weeks ago. We rescued a 14-year-old that was already pregnant, living with adult men. Horrific what's going on, and all of us should be backing the administration's attempts at bringing justice and rectification of this situation. Planned Parenthood is facing catastrophic consequences after the Supreme Court rules against the group. And states can now defund Planned Parenthood. South Carolina, you're leading the way. Great job. Also, the Wisconsin Supreme Court has shut down Democrat attempts to redraw the state's congressional map after the 2026 midterms. This was a big worry when the new Wisconsin Supreme Court justice was elected, but it looks like this was a decisive victory. I think it was unanimous, shutting down this attempt to redraw the lines and skew the elections after the 2026 midterms. Trump is considering, again, this unusual move to undercut Federal Reserve Chairman Powell. I just think this, again, is one thing I'm going to keep talking about and talking about. We need to abolish the Federal Reserve, and anything that can be done to bring accountability in that sphere is good. Also, the United States announces new policies to speed up offshore critical mineral development. This follows Trump's executive order aimed at tackling the risk of depending on foreign adversaries for such minerals. Now, remember, the United States used to be one of the largest suppliers of rare earth minerals to the world. But the key is here, I think this is going to be used to underscore universal basic income. A percentage of what is extracted from rare earth minerals, oil, etc., is going to be used as a universal basic income for all Americans, similar to what happens up in Alaska. So watch that happen. And again, bookmark this. We were talking about it ahead of time. Also, Nestle says it will eliminate artificial colors from its U.S. food and beverages by the middle of 2026. Boy, RFK Jr. continues to bring victory after victory. And then this great video of a fireball seen in North Carolina, South Carolina, Atlanta, Tennessee, and Florida. Look at that thing. Boom. And they're trying to get some first-person accounts with that. And that is the briefing. Remember, the antidote to dependency and socialism is to be a God-fearing, self-reliant, freedom-loving American. When we come back from the break, Clare Lopez.
What if I told you you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today. We're back with our guest today, Clare Lopez. She's the founder and president of Lopez Liberty LLC, focusing on national security threats, including the Islamic movements and Marxist collaborators here in the United States. A former CIA operations officer, she has contributed all across the country, but really an expert also on Iran. Clare, thanks for joining me today on Patriot Radio.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Matt. Glad to be back with you again.
Well, exciting things happening in the Middle East right now, to say the least. What is your assessment of what's happened so far in Iran?
Oh, well, I heard one commentator on a show, I guess earlier this week or so, saying that, to put this in perspective in a way, October 7th, 2023 was the earthquake that actually shook the entire Middle East, but of course, particularly Israel. Everything that's happened after that are aftershocks. The takedown of Hamas, the takedown of Hezbollah, the takedown of the Houthis to some extent at least, and the ouster of the Bashar al-Assad regime in Damascus. All of these things contributed to where we are right now, and I think it might be useful to think of them as aftershocks of October the 7th. And so what we're looking at more immediately now was the Israeli decision in absolutely close collaboration, coordination with the United States, with President Donald Trump, together, of course, with Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. The decision there to launch Operation Rising Lion, and that began the night of June 12-13. This is 2025. And those strikes by the incredible proficiency, the incredible skill of the and courage of the Israeli pilots, because this was done by manned aircraft of the Israeli Air Force, flew all the way to Iran, something like 1,800 kilometers, refueled along the way with United States help of our KC-135 refueling tankers, aerial refueling tankers, and there over the Iranian territory, the IAF, those pilots dropped very precision targeted bombs that in the first instance took out anything remaining of Iran's aerial defenses, and that would be in particular ballistic missiles, ballistic missile sites, ballistic missile launchers in particular. That cleared the way for further operations, which continued with Operation Rising Lion, to take out to attack the Iranian nuclear weapons program, and that means Natanz, Isfahan, Fordow, as well as headquarters and leadership figures of the Iranian regime. I mean the IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or Pasdaran, the Quds Force, the Basij, which are those guys in the black outfits on the black motorcycles that put down all the popular street protests of the Iranian people. Basij also took out quite a number. I've seen as many as 15, maybe it's more now, of the top Iranian nuclear scientists, the ones who really formed the brain trust for Iran's nuclear weapons program, how to enrich uranium, how to form the metallurgical process to form a nuclear warhead, how to attach those warheads to the nose cones of Iran's ballistic missiles. Those scientists, at least a dozen and more, gone, taken out, as well then as the command and control of so many of those regime organizations that I mentioned. That basically cleared the way then for last weekend, about a week ago, the United States got involved with the launch of Operation Midnight Hammer. And because some of these enrichment sites, again, Natanz, Fordow, Isfahan to some extent too, were deeply buried. Fordow, in fact, under a mountain, right, no less. The United States sent in our B-2 bombers. They flew out from Missouri. I don't know how many hours, I forget, to get all the way without stopping. Aerial refueling along the way, escorted by U.S. fighter jets, all the way to Iran, where they dropped these GBU-57s. Those are the great big abbreviated MOPs, M-O-P, massive ordnance penetrator bombs, on these three places, Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordow. After action reports still coming in, or BDAs, as they sometimes say, battle damage assessments still coming in. But what it looks like is that those three enrichment sites, also storage sites for highly enriched uranium, at least 60%, in my opinion, they probably had well up to weapons grade uranium, which is 90% and above. But took those out. They are gone as far as their capability to enrich uranium for a long time. Those are assessments coming from the U.S., from the IAEA, that's the International Atomic Energy Agency, and from the Israelis too. So in the aftermath of that, just a couple of nights ago, surprise, President Trump announced on Truth Social media, that he had brokered, together with the assistance of, well, what do you call it, our frenemy, Qatar, right, a ceasefire between Iran and Israel. That is where we're at the moment. We'll see how long that lasts. I suspect probably not very long, because whatever is left of that regime in Tehran is absolutely committed to continue its drive to a deliverable nuclear weapon. And we do not know, the IAEA doesn't know where a whole bunch of missing highly enriched uranium is. And we don't know also, at least publicly, in public domain, what kind of other secret sites Iran may have, where things like centrifuges and highly enriched uranium and so forth can continue to pursue that nuclear weapons project. So that's where we're at the moment.
Well, that brings up a great question regarding something Sam Faddis is keyed on, and that there is very likely, according to multiple sources, another secret facility known as Pickaxe Mountain, and that they may actually already have a nuclear facility or an alternate nuclear facility started there. The intelligence game is always changing, and you always want to develop, your information and corroborate the information that you have. Is it possible the Iranians do have that underground site? And then if so, then what should the United States be doing about it instead of trying to do a ceasefire?
Well, I think it's very likely. I mean, Sam Faddis has very good sources, as well as himself, being formerly intelligence community. So, I would be surprised if the Iranian regime did not have at least one other secret site where centrifuges may be, and also who knows how much enriched uranium in terms of stockpiles too, maybe even the metallurgical facilities to actually make the hemispheres, the bomb warhead itself. We know for a fact that there are ballistic missile sites further to the eastern part of Iran that have not been hit, to all reports that I've seen. And that makes sense because Israel, of course, would have hit and did hit the ballistic missile launch sites further to the west because they were closer to Israel, right? Take those out and reduce that threat significantly. But there remain a number of ballistic missile sites to the east, the eastern part of Iran. The other thing I'll say is that Iran is surrounded really geographically by mountainous regions, various mountain ranges, in which it would be a surprise to me if they had not already established one or more secret nuclear weapon sites. So your question then, what should we be doing with this understanding? First of all, I think that it's going to be the Israelis, the Mossad, which was spectacular in its collection of intelligence, literally over a period of years, that led up to the possibility of what they accomplished during Operation Rising Lion. But great credit has to go as well to the internal Iranian resistance forces, I think probably majority MEK, Mujahideen Khalq, that provided the intelligence on the ground for the Israeli Mossad to collect, to pass back to the upper levels of the Israeli government. And I expect that those networks, whatever's not being swept up now, brutal crackdown going on inside of Iran right now, but whoever survives that probably will continue to be able to feed out information to the Israelis, the Mossad, that will track and find, if they've not already done it, find secret sites, launch sites for ballistic missiles, enrichment sites if there are any. And what the United States will do is what we've always done, and that is rely on the Mossad for our information, but also on the IAEA, or the International Atomic Energy Agency. They're monitoring cameras and sniffers and other things, in those three locations. Again, Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordo clearly have been wiped out, obliterated. So the IAEA does not have, those eyes on, that equipment to monitor what's going on at those sites. But they may have equipment at other sites that they haven't talked about either. Don't know that, but they will be the most reliable source of information, I think. And then I'd mention one other, and that is David Albright's group that we call the Good ISIS, because its acronym is ISIS. Yeah. Stands for International Science Institute for Science and International Security. And they're very good at, David Albright himself, of course, a former IAEA inspector, but they're very good at reporting on IAEA reporting, but amplifying it and also simplifying it for those of us who are not nuclear physicists. So I think all of this is going to be going on. I myself, I think that calling a ceasefire at this moment, especially one brokered by Qatar, of all places, was a mistake. I think that when President Trump says unconditional surrender, he should mean it, and he didn't. There was no unconditional surrender by Iran. There was no commitment to disassemble, dismantle its remaining, whatever may be remaining of its nuclear weapons program, ballistic missile program. None of that happened. So I'm disappointed in that. And I'm also disappointed for the Iranian people who are now bearing the brunt of that brutal regime's crackdown inside of Iran going on right now, mass arrests, probably torture and executions to follow.
As you well know, prior to 1979, under the Shah, Iran was a pro-Western country. A little bit of an oversimplification, but a pro-Western country. Now Reza Pahlavi, the crown prince, coming forward and calling on the people of Iran to rise up and throw off the 12er Jafari school regime under the Ayatollah. Do you think the people will actually rise up, or is the machinery there still too oppressive for them to do that?
Well, I mean, the thing is that Reza Pahlavi is a very good, nice man. But he has grown up in America since about the age of 17 or 18 when his family fled Iran, became a very successful businessman. He comes from the world of business, you know, nice suits, beautiful ties, Gucci loafers. He is not someone who's going to lead the very hard fight, and I mean street fight, that the Iranian people are going to have to accomplish if they're going to overthrow that regime. And I don't think that a ceasefire at this point in time that removes all pressure from that regime is going to help the people. It's why I think they hesitate up until now, understandably, to take to the streets, because they don't know if there's anybody going to back them up or be behind them. And although Reza Pahlavi has, a presence and a commitment, to what comes after that inqilab, that new revolution in Iran, it's that in-between part, the street fighting, the hard fighting that's going to have to overthrow the regime and what's left of its repressive different organizations like Pasdaran and Quds Force and Basij, police, national police, and so forth. That in-between part that he doesn't really know what to do with. But the internal Iranian resistance are the ones who are going to lead that fight.
When we come back from the break, more with Clare Lopez about the threat of sleeper cells right here in the United States of America.
What if I told you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today. And we're back with Clare Lopez at Clare M. Lopez on Twitter, former CIA operations officer, expert on Iran, and talking about the sleeper cells here in the United States of America. Some are saying this threat is overblown. Some are saying, no, this has been, a threat many, many years in the making that we should take very seriously. And obviously the context is 600 plus Iranians have been arrested in recent weeks under Trump's administration. So something obviously is going on. How do you evaluate this threat to the United States?
Well, I also would take it very seriously. And it's not just Iranians. We know, for example, during the presidential campaign of last year, of 2024, it was openly reported that there were Iranian hit squads of the IRGC in the United States, literally gunning for President Trump. Prior to that, even, it was known, open source, that there were Iranian hit teams not only gunning for President Trump from his first administration, but also for senior officials who served in that administration and who supported the Iranian people. In particular, I would say John Bolton, our former national security advisor, also Mike Pompeo, who was both former CIA director and then Secretary of State, and some others, a number of others, all identified as targets for these hit squads. Now, I don't know at what point those identities were learned or followed up on, but you're absolutely right there, Matt, that in recent days, we know that a bunch of Iranian nationals, including one who was carrying some kind of an ID card, identifying himself as a sniper in the Iranian army. So he must not have been terribly well trained. Maybe as a sniper, but not as a sleeper cell operative, no. But in any case, they're rounding these people up. But I would add that even perhaps more threatening and a larger threat are the many, many, many Hezbollah cells throughout the United States. Obviously throughout South and Central America, Mexico, where they work with the cartels. But here in the United States, and we know this again from open source reporting on things like arrests and prosecutions, cases that were brought to court of Hezbollah operatives caught in various different kinds of criminal operations, because that's how they fund themselves. But the point there that I really want to make is that both the Pasdaran operatives and the Hezbollah operatives take advantage of Lebanese communities, willing or unwilling, it's not up to them, in which to conceal themselves across the United States, certainly around places like Detroit, Michigan, Dearborn, some suburbs of Chicago, elsewhere. But also the point here that they will both be using Shia mosques in the United States as also cover and also headquarters, command and control centers for some of their operations.
So that begs the question of why stop short of taking out the Ayatollah? I mean, the Israelis clearly knew where he was. The United States clearly knew where he was. Why not take out the Ayatollah? Could it be because Trump maybe wanted to give some space to take down some of the sleeper cells here in the United States? Or, I mean, because it just didn't make sense. It was like a 180-degree turn all of a sudden.
Yeah, it seems so to me too. And not the Ayatollah. There are tens of thousands of Ayatollahs in Iran, but the supreme leader. The
supreme leader, yeah.
The Ayatollah, Ali Khamenei. By the way, he's not really even entitled to the title of Ayatollah. Quick story. Back in 1989, when the Ayatollah, the Grand Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini of the revolution, died, 1989. His chosen successor was another Grand Ayatollah, Montazeri, but he got kicked out of the succession because he had complained and criticized the 1988 prison massacre that accompanied the end of the Iran-Iraq war, when Khomeini realized that with the end of that war, the focus of the Iranian people would turn to internal affairs, and he murdered something like 30,000 opposition figures, especially MEK, in the prisons. That's why Montazeri was kicked out of the succession lineup. So they had to find somebody else, and quick, because Khomeini was dead. And so what they did is they settled on Ali Khamenei, who at that time was only a Hojatul Islam. That is a clerical title that's kind of middling. It's sort of in the middle of the ranks, not very elevated at all. He was a Hojatul Islam. And they artificially just bumped him up to Ayatollah so he could succeed Khomeini as the supreme leader. So that's who Commie is. But why didn't they knock him off this time? Why didn't they go for it? I don't know, except the intercession of our BFF again, Qatar. I really don't know. And taking, like I said, taking the pressure off of that brutal regime in Tehran only exposes now the people of Iran, the population, everybody who has ever stood up and tried to stand for their liberty, stood for their freedom against this regime. They're being rounded up now by the hundreds, if not thousands, and thrown in jail. And that's because of this ceasefire that took the pressure off of the regime. In addition to allowing that regime and its leadership, Khamenei, to survive. So it was a 180-degree turn. I think many of us were taken by absolute surprise at that. There was no unconditional surrender. There was no fulfillment of President Trump's demands before Operation Midnight Hammer. None of that happened. Just, okay, we quit.
Yeah, just incredible. It just did not make any sense. And of course, we're not, privy to all the information the president has. Right. But boy, raises a lot of questions. And back to the sleeper cells, what's the scope of the threat, do you think, here in the United States? I've heard varying 6,000 cells to 10,000. I mean, what is the actual scope of the threat that we're looking at here in the United States of America from a realistic, objective point of view?
Well, I don't think any of us really knows the numbers. So I'm not going to throw out any kind of numbers, but I will say that especially the Hezbollah network is large. The Pasdaran, the IRGC network, is probably quite a bit smaller, but nevertheless deadly. And we've heard in just the last few days, I think, that both Department of Homeland Security and the FBI have issued security warnings, public security warnings, to be aware, to be on the alert for potential threats coming from some of these bad actors. And what I would think is that they would target in particular if they take action, because again, both the top leadership, command and control of the regime in Tehran and Hezbollah have been decapitated. They don't have command and control anymore over cells far flung, let's say in Europe to United States. Or if they do, they're scrambling to try to reestablish those command and control connections. But that the threats that I would think about would be to our critical infrastructure, to include, of course, as both FBI and DHS mentioned, cyber threats, but then, more kinetic, perhaps, attacks against electric systems, substations, water pipelines, oil and gas depots, that sort of thing. That's what I would hope that our local, state level, and also sheriff's departments would be on the lookout for, because that's what I would look to. That's what I would think of first in terms of threats.
The other shocking thing that kind of came out of this for me was clearly Iran supplies a massive amount of oil to China. And to stop that flow of oil deprives China of the ability to have fuel to wage war against Taiwan or just throughout the Pacific theater. And then all of a sudden turning around and saying, well, China is going to buy oil from us. That shocked me quite a bit. How does China play into this whole thing? Well,
both China and Russia are closely aligned with Iran. And Iran has been providing, for example, drones and drone technology to Russia for its use in its invasion and slaughter of the Ukrainian people. Iran, as you just said, also is a large supplier of oil for China. Maybe as much as 25-30% of China's imports come from Iran. And those shipments, certainly under the last 4 years of the Biden administration, even though sanctions remained in place, they were not enforced, and that flow continued. But in reverse then, what happened is that the Chinese purchase of that oil filled Iranian coffers to spend with its jihadi Islamic terror proxies, and as well to work on its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. So, cutting off that supply of oil with the return payments back to Iran, really would have, been significant blows to both of those enemy regimes. Yes, that would have, cost the global oil market a certain percentage of available oil, and prices here as well as elsewhere would have risen, perhaps a lot. Yes, but would that not have been worth it? Now, the rising prices also would at the same time benefit Russia for its own exports of oil and natural gas. And maybe all of those things were being taken into account. We don't know for sure. But yeah, to state openly, that China's going to continue to buy oil, and they're not lifting sanctions. It was I guess clarified maybe by Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, if I remember, that they were not, the United States, the Trump White House, not lifting sanctions again, just like under the Biden administration, but not enforcing them, letting the oil ships flow. So I don't know, why that decision was taken, unless it's, concern for the American consumer. But, I know that the Trump administration is opening up leases and oil drilling.
Huge.
In Alaska and other places, as in offshore. We can expand our own production. Certainly that would be, helpful to the American consumer, whatever may happen elsewhere on the world market.
Amen. Once again, Clare Lopez, an amazing conversation. Really appreciate everything you do, and thank you again for the analysis. We'll have you back on soon. Keep up the fight.
Thank you so much.
Clare Lopez, former CIA operations officer, at Clare M. Lopez on Twitter. Follow her there. Fantastic analysis on everything going on there in the Middle East. So what can you do? Well, first and foremost, pray for the peace of Jerusalem and for the peace of Israel. And secondly, make sure that you have your own supply chain locked down, because you never know what's going to happen. And I prefer a supply chain that's vertically integrated and is here inside the United States and not subject to the whims of foreign wars and proxy attacks and terrorism. And you can find that at patriotradio.us/buy Americans. So you can take your supply chain into your own hands and be prepared. This is Matt Shea. Thank you so much for joining me on Patriot Radio today. May God bless all of you. He is making this generation the greatest one. The awakening is here. So keep up the fight.